Recently, Russia announced that it will immediately cease the UN-brokered grain deal that has exported more than 9 million tons of product from Ukraine during the war and helped ease soaring global food prices. Ukraine has accused Russia of creating a world, quote, Hunger Games in that wake. The Russian Defense Ministry cited an alleged Ukrainian drone attack against their Black Sea Fleet ships off the coast of occupied Crimea as the reason for their actions. Ukraine has denied the attack, saying that the Russians mishandled their own weapons, causing explosions. The Russian declaration came one day after UN Chief Antonio Guterres urged Russia and Ukraine to renew the grain export deal, which was scheduled to expire on November 19th. Guterres also said that other countries, mainly in the West, expedite the removal of the obstacles blocking Russian grain and fertilizer exports. Ukrainian President Zelensky called the Russian move, quote, predictable. He accused Moscow of blockading ships carrying grain since September. Currently, he said 176 vessels are backed up at sea, carrying more than 2 million tons of food. He was quoted as saying, "This is a transparent attempt by Russia to return to the threat of large-scale famine in Africa and Asia." He called for a tough response against Russia from international bodies like the UN and the G20. In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the suspension was regrettable and urged all parties to keep this essential life-saving initiative functioning. He said, quote, "Any act by Russia to disrupt these critical grain exports is essentially a statement that people and families around the world should pay more for food or go hungry," end quote. He went on to say, quote, "In suspending this arrangement, Russia is again weaponizing food in the war it started, directly impacting low and middle income countries and global food prices, and exasperating already dire humanitarian crises and food insecurity," end quote. Ukraine's Ministry of Infrastructure said that Ukraine has never threatened the Black Sea grain corridor and would continue to try to keep shipments going. It said since the first ship left Odessa on August 1st, more than 9 million tons of food have been exported, including more than 5 million tons to Africa and Asian countries. As part of the UN World Food Program, it said 190,000 tons of wheat have been sent to countries where there is hunger. Russia's agriculture minister said Moscow stands ready to, quote, fully replace Ukrainian grain and deliver supplies at affordable prices to all interested countries, end quote. In remarks carried by the state, it was also said that they were ready to, quote, supply up to 500,000 tons of grain to the poorest countries free of charge in the next 4 months. The Russian Defense Ministry said a minesweeper had minor damage during an alleged pre-dawn Ukrainian attack on Navy and civilian vessels. The ministry claimed Russian forces had repelled 16 attacking drones. The governor of the region claimed the port saw a massive attack by air and sea drones. He provided no evidence, of course, saying all video would be seized for security reasons. An advisor to Ukraine's Interior Ministry claimed that careless handling of explosives had caused blasts on 4 warships in Russia's Black Sea Fleet. So after those facts and opinions were presented, here's a little perspective from my point of view. Russia once again shows the world exactly what we all assume. They are willing to do anything to disrupt Ukrainian and world affairs. They're even willing to disrupt humanitarian efforts in order to further apply pressure to Ukraine and many other countries as well. Now, of course, earlier mention was made of Russia stating that it would supply grain to these other countries in question, that all they had to do was ask and it would be free for 4 months of delivery. First of all, how many of these requests would simply go unheard? It doesn't seem like much of a stretch to think Russia would ignore the request and say that no one had ever asked for their grain. Secondly, even if they did receive the request and provide the grain for the next 4 months, what would the price rise to after that? It's absurd for the world to assume that Russia wouldn't inflate prices to the starving world once the major grain deal was shut down from Ukraine. And lastly, once Russia is in control of a humanitarian effort, how long before it's leveraged on the world stage to force lifting sanctions and penalties against them? This is clearly a move that invites criticism. There seems to be very little evidence that anything aggressive happened in the region that would have provoked such a response. Each side is playing the hearsay game, the he said, she said, and no one has any proof of what's actually going on. The Western and European world is obviously going to be biased and side against Russia, but that doesn't mean any of us really know what's happening there. It's terrifying to truly take time and break down what's happening with Russia right now. If the world continues to placate them and appease, how long before their demands grow too wild for us to consider? How much will we all let slip by in the meantime? If any viewers are familiar with our history at all, you know that this all should sound familiar. World War I and II saw much appeasement prior to them becoming open conflict. While there are nearly unfathomable risks to consider, the world leaders need to understand who they are dealing with and the consequences of the past. So now the call to action. International affairs are never cut and dry in our globalized world. And that's why we need to discuss them and understand our history, our options, and our consequences. So without further ado, I open the floor to the viewers. Let the forum commence. And as always, think freely, discuss openly.